And here we are finishing our 15th book of the Bible. Yay! This seems a little surreal to me sometimes because I love how I'm seeing my intentionality just, play out so tangibly. And I'm very grateful to God for that. So Proverbs 30 to 31, the end of the book of the Proverbs, and it is written by Agur. And little is known about Agur, the writer, or of whom this chapter is written of, because some people say it was written by him, some people say it was written of him. But he appears to be a wise sage. He starts out by pointing out that there is wisdom in nothing compared, that his wisdom is nothing compared to God's wisdom. He says that he's incapable of fully understanding man's mind, and so how could he presume to try to understand the workings of God's mind? In verse 4, we see some words that look like they belong in the book of Job. The last line definitely sounds prophetic. It says, "What is his name and what is his son's name, if you know?" Well, I know, I definitely know. His name is Jesus. How interesting that he makes reference to Jesus as the Son of God, or, who is the Son of God, alluding to the Son of God. This is almost like hundreds of years before his time, which is why I believe that it was a prophetic statement. Agur requests two things of the Lord: to keep him honest and to keep him from sin. His request for humility showed his concern for character more than wealth and the soft life. He knew that he was susceptible to sin and asked for circumstances that would cause him to keep his eyes on God. Now, in chapter 11 to 14, he described a generation. Now, did that generation seem familiar to you? It sure did to me. All I could think of was, as I read, were all the kind of things that I read about on these Twitter streets. Because, the generation that he described seemed like a very Twitter generation, especially the part in verse 14 where it says, "Their teeth are like swords and fangs like knives." This generation is a warring generation, a generation of violence. And that's what you see on these Twitter streets. We must be wary of the materialistic generation that we live in, that constantly demands that we be in a state of acquisition. Get more, get more, get more. You don't have enough. That's all we ever hear. You never have enough of anything, right? It's a relief to realize that we can trust God to give us our portion. Everything that we need comes from God. We don't need to listen to the voices that tell us that we just need to keep on acquiring. Matthew 6:8 says, "Therefore, do not be like them, for your Father knows the things that you have need of before you even ask him." So don't be like them, they that just go out to seek what they need to seek. So this comes back to the point that we talked about yesterday in the book of Ecclesiastes: contentment and trust in God. Proverbs 31 is probably the most quoted chapter for women. You know how everybody has said about the Proverbs 31 woman. And we are often admonished to be like the woman described in his verses. Reading the chapter in context, we'll see that rather than literally adapting her traits, we must understand that fear of the Lord brings purpose and meaning to our existence, and wisdom, that is the fruit of the fear of the Lord, is portrayed here through the contrast between the wise and the foolish. Now, the chapter starts off, giving some sort of examples or contrasting scenarios about the wise and the foolish before it speaks about the woman. But as I read it, I kind of tied both together as opposed to reading them independently. Yes, where yeah. And the verses also provide practical everyday advice for living and relating to people. The first chapter the first part was allegedly written of King Lemuel's mother, right? But theologians don't believe that there was no one ever called King Lemuel. They try to research and see who he was. But they now found out, or they now concluded that that was a synonym for, sorry, did I say synonym? A pseudonym name for King Solomon. So these are the wise sayings. Now, if we believe that, so now these are the wise sayings given to him by his mother. And who was his mother? Bathsheba. So reading through these first parts, it's easy to see how it could be very much so, because the mother was saying, son, this is what you need. This is who you need. I'm sure the mother was frustrated when this mother was just marrying all these women. And in her mind, she's like, come, let me advise you. So back to the Proverbs 31 woman. I bet I'm not the only one who feels intimidated by her. Every time I read this thing, I always feel intimidated. This woman was doing all these things at all these times. And I felt, I always feel, I guess we as women will always have that feeling of inadequacy when we try to match ourselves up with her. And, all the virtues she possessed and all the ideals she represented seem intimidating. But she's a personification of the ideal wife that every woman should be and every man looks out for. Now, we'll do well to remember that this is wisdom literature and not literal. And so rather than spend our lives trying to compare her lives, literally with ours, we should pay attention to the wisdom in her heart and the things that she valued. She's a paragon of virtue, trustworthy, industrious, organized, supportive, loving, and kind. And she trusts and fears the Lord. So that is the model that we should be looking at, not trying to literally be the Proverbs 31 woman. Because I know I heard something, they said she probably wasn't all these things at the same time. It was probably her journey, and she was, living that life, sequentially, if you like. Now, here's my hashtag getting to know God lesson. We should depend on God to make us who we truly want to be for him. We cannot depend on ourselves because we can never get it right. And God will ultimately get all the praise and glory for who we are. All the praiseworthy attributes of the Proverbs 31 woman are noble, rooted in who God is to her, meaning that God is to be praised too. Her whole life points to God. Verse 30 points to the key to her success. And verse 30 says, charm is deceitful, beauty is fleeting, but the woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. So what's that underlying thing? Fear the Lord, woman, and you will be the Proverbs 31 woman. Thank you for joining me and for ending Proverbs with me. Tomorrow we'll continue with Kings, 1 Kings 12 to 14, and I look forward to seeing you here. Bye.